was now more than 3 months since the murder, and the 9 days' wonder was a thing of the past. The tragic fate of Oliver White was quite forgotten. After the trial, everyone, including the detective office, had given up the matter and mentally relegated it to the list of undiscovered crimes. In spite of the utmost vigilance, nothing new had been discovered, and it seemed likely that the assassin would remain a free man. There were only 2 people in Melbourne who still held the contrary opinion, and they were the lawyer Colton and the detective Kilsip. Both these men had sworn to discover this unknown murderer who struck his cowardly blow in the dark, and though there seemed no possible chance of success, yet they worked on. Kilsip suspected Roger Morland, the boon companion of the dead man who had testified so damagingly against Brian Fitzgerald at his trial. But Kilsip's suspicions were vague and uncertain, and there seemed little hope of verifying them. The barrister did not as yet suspect any particular person, but he thought that when Fitzgerald told him the secret which Rosanna Moore had confided to his keeping, the real murderer would soon be discovered. Brian had been back in Melbourne almost a week, but though he had fully determined to do so, he had not yet been to Colton to tell all. He felt keenly his recent position in the prisoner's dock, and would see no one, nor would he mix with his former friends, so great was his dread of being stared at. Now, as he was sitting in his room smoking, his landlady entered with a telegram. Brian tore open the envelope and found the message was from Madge, to say that they had returned from the country and to ask him to dine with them that evening. Brian folded up the telegram, then rising from his seat, he walked moodily up and down the room, with his hands in his pockets. "So he is here," said the young man aloud, "and I shall have to meet him and shake hands with him, knowing all the time what he is. If it were not for Madge, I'd leave this place at once, but after the way she stood by me in my trouble, I should be a coward if I did so." Brian sent a reply to Madge, saying that he would come that evening, but not to dinner. The garden looked charming in the moonlight, with the black, dense cypress trees standing up against the sky, and the great fountain splashing cool and silvery. There was a heavily foliaged oak by the gate, and Madge strolled down the path and stood under it in the shadow, listening to the whisper and rustle of its leaves. Then she heard the iron gate open and shut with a clash, and springing to her feet, saw someone coming up the path in a light coat and soft hat. "Oh, it's you at last, Brian. Why did you not come before?" "Not being Brian, I can't say," answered her father's voice. Madge burst out laughing. "What an absurd mistake! I thought you were Brian." "Indeed?" "Yes. In that hat and coat I couldn't tell the difference in the moonlight." "Nonsense, child. You're fanciful." And turning on his heel, he walked rapidly towards the house, leaving Madge staring after him in astonishment, as well she might, for her father had never spoken to her so roughly before. Wondering at the cause of his sudden anger, she stood spellbound, until there came a step behind her and a soft, low whistle. She turned with a scream, and saw Brian smiling at her. "Oh, it's you," she cried with a pout, as he caught her in his arms and kissed her. "Only me," said Brian ungrammatically. "Disappointing, isn't it?" "Oh, fearfully." Arm in arm they walked towards the house. "Do you know, I made such a curious mistake just now. I thought Papa was you. He had on a light coat and a soft hat, just like you wear sometimes, and as you're both the same height, I took you for one another." Brian did not answer, but there was a cold feeling at his heart. They went into the drawing-room and found that Mr. Frettlby had gone up to his study and did not want to be disturbed. Madge sat down to the piano, but before she struck a note, Brian took both her hands prisoners. "Madge, what did your father say when you made that mistake?" "He was very angry, quite cross. I'm sure I don't know why." Brian sighed as he released her hands, and was about to reply when the visitor's bell sounded. They heard the servant answer it, and then someone was taken upstairs to Mr. Frettlby's study. When the footman came in to light the gas, Madge asked who it was that had come to the door. "I don't know, miss." "But I thought that Papa said he was not to be disturbed." "Yes, miss, but the gentleman had an appointment with him." "Poor Papa! He has always got such a lot to do." Left to themselves, Madge began playing Waldteufel's latest waltz, a dreamy, haunting melody with a touch of sadness in it. Brian, lying lazily on the sofa, listened. Suddenly Madge stopped playing as she heard a loud cry, evidently proceeding from her father's study. Recollecting Dr. Chinston's warning about his health, she ran out of the room and upstairs, leaving Brian rather puzzled by her unceremonious departure, for though he had heard the cry, yet he did not attach much importance to it. Madge knocked at the study door, and then she tried to open it, but it was locked. "Who's there?" asked her father from inside. "Only me, Papa. I thought you were—" No, I'm all right. Go downstairs. I'll join you shortly." Madge went back down, only half satisfied with the explanation. She found Brian waiting at the foot of the staircase with rather an anxious face. "What's the matter?" "Papa says nothing, but I'm sure he must have been startled, or he would not have cried out like that." She told him what Dr. Chinston had said about the state of her father's heart, a recital which shocked Brian greatly. They did not return to the drawing-room, but went out on the veranda, where, after wrapping a cloak around Madge, Fitzgerald lit a cigarette. They sat down at the far end, somewhat in the shadow, and could see the hall door wide open and a warm flood of mellow light pouring therefrom. After about a quarter of an hour, Madge's alarm about her father having somewhat subsided, they were chatting on indifferent subjects, when a man came out of the hall door and paused for a moment on the steps of the veranda. He was dressed in rather a fashionable suit of clothes, but in spite of the heat of the night he had a thick white silk scarf round his throat. He turned to look back at the house, not seeing the lovers. "That's rather a cool individual," said Brian, removing his cigarette from between his lips. "I wonder what— Good God! Roger Morland!" There was not much sleep for Brian that night. He left Madge almost immediately and went home, but he did not go to bed. He felt too anxious and ill at ease to sleep, and passed the greater part of the night walking up and down his room, wondering what could be the meaning of Roger Morland's visit to Mark Frettlby. The man had no acquaintance with the millionaire, and yet he called by appointment. It is true he might have been in poverty, and Frettlby being well known as an extremely generous man, Morland might have called on him for money. But then the cry which Frettlby had given proved that he had been startled. That Morland had made some startling revelation was certain, and Fitzgerald felt sure that it was in connection with the hansom cab murder case. He wearied himself with conjectures about the matter, and towards daybreak threw himself, dressed as he was, on the bed, and slept fitfully till 12 o'clock the next day. He took his bath, and after dressing himself went into his sitting-room, where he had a cup of tea, which much refreshed him. His landlady, Mrs. Sampson, came crackling merrily upstairs with a letter, which proved to be from Madge. "I cannot understand what is the matter with Papa. Ever since that man Morland left last night, he has shut himself up in his study, and is writing there hour after hour. I went up this morning, but he would not let me in. He did not come to breakfast, and I am getting seriously alarmed. Come down tomorrow and see me, for I am anxious about his state of health, and I am sure that Morland told him something which has upset him." Writing, thought Brian as he put the letter in his pocket. What about, I wonder? Perhaps he is thinking of committing suicide. If so, I for one will not stop him. It would be acting for the best under the circumstances. Brian felt ill and weary, the want of sleep and the mental worry telling on him terribly, and he looked 10 years older than he did before the murder of White. It is trouble which draws lines on the smooth forehead and furrows round the mouth. If a man has any mental worry, his life becomes a positive agony to him. Mental tortures are quite as bad as physical ones, if not worse. The last thing before dropping off to sleep is the thought of trouble, and with the first faint light of dawn, it returns and hammers all day at the weary brain. But while a man can sleep, life is rendered at least endurable. And of all the blessings which Providence has bestowed, there is none so precious as that same sleep. Brian felt the need of rest, so sending a telegram to Colton to call on him in the morning, and another to Madge that he would be down to luncheon on the morrow, he stayed indoors all day and amused himself with smoking and reading. He went to bed early and succeeded in having a sound sleep, so when he awoke next morning he felt considerably refreshed and invigorated. He was having his breakfast at 8:30 when he heard the sound of wheels, and immediately afterwards a ring at the bell. He went to the window and saw Colton's trap was at the door. The owner was shortly afterwards shown into the room. "Well, you are a nice fellow," cried the lawyer, after greetings were over. "Here I've been, waiting for you with all the patience of Job, thinking you were still up country." Brian laughed at his indignation. "Will you have some breakfast?" "What have you got?" Colton looked over the table. "Ham and eggs. Your landlady's culinary ideas are very limited. Most landladies' ideas are. Unless heaven invents some new animal, lodgers will go on getting beef and mutton, alternated with hash, until the end of the world. When one is in Rome, one mustn't speak ill of the Pope. Do you think your landlady could supply me with brandy and soda?" "I think so." Fitzgerald rose and rang the bell. "But isn't it rather early for that sort of thing?" "There's a proverb about glass houses which applies to you in this particular instance." Whereupon Fitzgerald laughed, and Colton, having been supplied with what he required, prepared to talk business. The lawyer leaned back in his chair. "I need hardly tell you how anxious I am to hear what you've got to say, but I may as well inform you that I believe I know half your secret already." "Indeed. In that case I need not—" "Yes, you need. I told you I only know half." "Which half?" Rather difficult to answer. However, I'll tell you what I know, and you can supply all deficiencies. Wait." He arose and closed the door carefully, then resumed his seat. "Mother Guttersnipe died the other night." "She's dead?" "As a doornail. And a horrible deathbed it was. Her screams ring in my ears yet. But before she died, she sent for me, and said—" "What?" "That she was the mother of Rosanna Moore." "Yes." "And that Sal Rawlins was Rosanna's child." "And the father?" "Was Mark Frettlby." "Ah." The lawyer leaned forward expectantly. "That is all I know. And now, what have you to tell me?" "Nothing." "Nothing? Ah, then this is what Rosanna Moore told you when she died?" "Yes." "Then why have you made such a mystery about it?" "You ask that?" Fitzgerald looked up in surprise. "If I had told it, don't you see what difference it would have made to Madge?" "I'm sure I don't." "I suppose you mean Frettlby's connection with Rosanna Moore. Well, of course, it was not a very creditable thing for her to have been Frettlby's mistress, but still, his mistress." "Then you don't know all." "What do you mean? Was she not his mistress?" "No. His wife." Colton sprang to his feet. "His wife?" Fitzgerald nodded. "Why? Mother Guttersnipe did not know this. She thought Rosanna was Frettlby's mistress." "They kept the marriage secret, and as Rosanna ran away with someone else shortly afterwards, Frettlby never revealed it." "I understand now. For if Mark Frettlby was lawfully married to Rosanna Moore, then Madge is illegitimate." "Yes, and she now occupies the place which Sal Rawlins, or rather Sal Frettlby, ought to hold." Colton's face grew a little sad. "Poor girl. But all this does not explain the mystery of White's murder." When Rosanna and White left England and returned to Australia, it was for the purpose of extorting money from Frettlby. When they arrived in Melbourne, Rosanna let White do all the business and kept herself quiet. She gave her marriage certificate to White, and he had it on him the night he was murdered. So that was the mysterious and precious paper which White carried about with him. It was. Then Gorby was right. The man to whom that document was valuable did murder White. Can you doubt it? And that man was... Not Mark Frettlby. Surely not Mark Frettlby. Brian nodded soberly. Yes, Mark Frettlby. There was a silence for a few moments, Colton being too much startled by the revelation to say anything. He saw that certificate as the only proof of Rosanna's story. Without it, she and White would be powerless, and his secret safe. When did you discover this? At the time you first came to see me in prison. When you said that White was murdered for the sake of a certain document. I knew full well what it was, and to whom it was of value, and I guessed immediately that Mark Frettlby had killed White in order to obtain it. The barrister sighed. There can be no doubt of it. So this is the reason Frettlby wanted Madge to marry White. Her hand was to be the price of his silence. When he withdrew his consent, White must have threatened him with exposure. Frettlby followed him up to town, got into the cab with him, and after killing him with chloroform, took the marriage certificate from his secret pocket and escaped. Brian rose to his feet and walked rapidly up and down the room. Now you can understand what a hell my life has been for the last few months. I had to sit with him, eat with him, and drink with him, with the knowledge that he was a murderer. And Madge, his daughter. Just then a knock came to his door, and Mrs. Sampson entered with a telegram, which she handed to Brian. He tore it open as she withdrew, and glancing over it gave a cry of horror and let it flutter to his feet. Colton turned rapidly on hearing his cry, and seeing him fall into a chair with a white face, snatched up the telegram and read it. When he did so, his face grew as pale and startled as Fitzgerald's. Lifting his hand, the barrister said solemnly, "It is the judgment of God." Every action, good or bad, which we do, has its corresponding reward. Mark Frettlby found it so, for the sins of his youth were now being punished in his old age. That relentless deity Nemesis had been an unseen spectator of all his thoughtless actions, and now she came to demand her just dues. Frettlby was thunderstruck when White arrived from England with the information that his first wife still lived, and that the daughter of his second was illegitimate. Sooner than risk exposure, Frettlby agreed to anything. But White's demands became too exorbitant, and he refused to comply with them. On White's death he again breathed freely, when suddenly a second possessor of his fatal secret started up in the person of Roger Morland. Frettlby foresaw that the friend of the murdered man would be his master, and his life would be one long misery, while after his death Morland would probably publish the whole ghastly story and defame the memory of the widely respected millionaire. What is it that Shakespeare says? Good name in man or woman is the immediate jewel of their souls. After all these years of spotless living, was he to be dragged down to the depths of infamy and degradation by a man like Morland? Already, in fancy, he heard the jeering cries of his fellow men, and saw the finger of scorn point at him. He, the great Mark Frettlby, famous throughout Australia for his honesty, integrity, and generosity. No, it could not be. And yet this would surely happen, unless he took means to prevent it. The day after he had seen Morland, and knew that his secret was no longer safe, since it was in the power of a man who might reveal it at any moment in a drunken fit, or out of sheer maliciousness, Frettlby sat at his desk writing. There seemed to be only one way open to him. He would write a confession of everything from the time he had first met Rosanna, and then death. His secret would then be safe. Safe? No, it could not be safe while Morland lived. When he was dead, Morland would see Madge and embitter her life with the story of her father's sins. He must live to protect her, and drag his weary chain of bitter remembrance through life. But still he would write out his confession, and after his death, whenever it may happen, it might help at least to secure some pity for a man who had been hardly dealt with by fate. His resolution taken, Frettlby put it into force at once, and sat all day at his desk, filling page after page with the history of his past life, which was so bitter to him. It was quite dark when he had finished, and while sitting in the twilight looking dreamily at the sheets scattered all over his desk, he heard a knock at the door and his daughter's voice asking if he was coming to dinner. All day long he had closed his door against everyone, but now, his task being ended, he collected all the closely written sheets together, placed them in a drawer of his escritoire, which he locked, and then opened the door. Madge entered rapidly and embraced him. "Dear Papa, what have you been doing all day in here by yourself?" He gently removed her loving arms from round his neck. "Writing." "Why? I thought you were ill." "No, dear, not ill, but worried." "I knew that dreadful man who came last night had told you something to worry you. Who is he?" "Oh, a friend of mine." "What? Roger Morland?" Her father started. "How do you know it was Roger Morland?" "Brian recognized him as he went out." Mark Frettlby hesitated for a few moments, and then busied himself with the papers on his desk. "You are right. It was Roger Morland. He's very hard up, and as he was a friend of poor White's, he asked me to assist him, which I did." He hated to hear himself telling such a deliberate falsehood, but there was no help for it. Madge must never know the truth so long as he could conceal it. "Just like you," said Madge, kissing him lightly with filial pride. "The best and kindest of men." He shivered slightly as he felt her caress, and thought how she would recoil from him did she know all. "Now, go down to dinner, my dear," he said, leading her to the door. "I will follow soon." That night he was singularly brilliant at the dinner-table. Generally a very reticent and grave man, on this night he laughed and talked so gaily that the very servants noticed the change. The fact was, he felt a sense of relief at having unburdened his mind, and felt as though by writing out that confession he had laid the spectre which had haunted him for so long. His daughter was delighted at the change in his spirits, but the old Scotch nurse, who had been in the house since Madge was a baby, shook her head. "His fee is no lang for the world." Mr. Frettlby went to bed early that night. The excitement of the last few days, and the feverish gaiety in which he had lately indulged, proving too strong for him. No sooner had he laid his head on his pillow than he dropped off to sleep at once, and forgot in placid slumber the troubles and worries of his waking hours. It was only 9 o'clock, so Madge stayed by herself in the great drawing-room and read a new novel which was then creating a sensation, called Sweet Violet Eyes. It belied its reputation, however, for it was very soon thrown on the table with a look of disgust, and rising from her seat, Madge walked up and down the room, wishing that some good fairy would hint to Brian that he was wanted. If man is a gregarious animal, how much more, then, is a woman? Miss Frettlby began to long for someone to talk to, and ringing the bell, ordered Sal to be sent in. The two girls had become great friends, and Madge, though by 2 years the younger, had assumed the role of mentor. Under her guidance, Sal was rapidly improving. It was a strange irony of fate which brought together these two children of the same father, each with such different histories, the one reared in luxury and affluence, never having known want, the other dragged up in the gutter, all unsexed and besmirched by the life she had led. It was the last thing in the world Mark Frettlby would have thought of seeing, his and Rosanna Moore's child, whom he believed as dead as he once had her mother, under the same roof as his daughter Madge. The room was almost in darkness, only one lamp being lighted. Near this one circle of soft light sat Madge and Sal, talking gaily, and away on the left-hand side they could see the open door and a warm flood of light pouring in from the hall. They had been talking together for some time, when Sal's quick ear caught a footfall on the soft carpet. Turning rapidly, she saw a tall figure advancing down the room. Madge saw it too, and started up in surprise on recognizing her father. He was clothed in his dressing gown and carried an envelope in his hand.
"Why, Papa?"
Sal grasped her arms.
"Hush! He's asleep."
And so he was. In accordance with the dictates of the excited brain, the weary body had risen from the bed and wandered about the house. The two girls, drawing back into the shadow, watched him with bated breath as he came slowly down the room. In a few moments he was within the circle of light, and moving noiselessly along, he laid the envelope he carried on the table. It was a large blue envelope, much worn, with writing in red ink on it, and Sal recognized it at once as the one she had seen in the possession of the dead woman. Frettleby opened the envelope and took therefrom a yellow, frayed piece of paper, which he spread out on the table. Madge bent forward to see it, but Sal, with a sudden terror, drew her back.
"For God's sake, miss, no!"
But it was too late. Madge had caught sight of the words on the paper. Marriage, Rosanna Moore, Mark Frettleby, and the whole awful truth flashed upon her. This was the document Rosanna Moore had handed to White. White had been murdered by the man to whom it was of great value.
"Oh, my father!"
She staggered blindly forward, and then with one piercing shriek fell to the ground. In doing so she struck against her father, who was still standing beside the table. Awakened suddenly, with that wild scream in his ears, he opened his eyes wide, put out feeble hands as if to keep something back, and with a strangled cry fell dead on the floor beside his daughter.